So with absolutely perfect timing, we ended up the last session on policy. How do we translate these results into policy? And our last session for the day is a policy panel, how to bring data and research to inform policy. We have a all-star cast on this panel. I will let them introduce themselves because you want to hear from them rather than from me. I just welcome our chair,
Let me get you a plate.
Adnan Khan. Chair. He's a professor here at the LSE and he's on leave as chief economist at FCDO. Floor is yours.
Fine. Okay. I'm Adnan. So thank you very much, Ariana. I both work for the FCDO now, but I have a long presence at LSE, still ongoing presence, where I teach at the School of Public Policy. I have also run the International Growth Center for a long time. I'm here primarily because this subject is very close to my heart, but also because it's very hard to say no to Oriana. So, without further ado, let me introduce the panel and very distinguished panel. So I'll not do full justice to them, but I'll just say a word about them. And so first we have Professor Paula Bustos, Chair of the European Economic Association. European Economic Association's Women in Economics Committee. So Paula is an ICRIA research professor at Pompeu Fabra University, many other affiliations that I will not do full justice to. Then we have Professor Anusha Chari, Chair of the American Economic Association's Committee on the Status of Women in the Economics Profession. She's also Professor of Economics and Finance at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Many other affiliations, very distinguished affiliations. Then we have Laura Parrish, Associate Director at GC Insight, an advisory research and evaluation consultancy. Our work is mostly with the public, private, and third sector clients to help them make better informed decisions. Also many other affiliations. Then we have Indy Sira from LSE's Director of Human Resources. Prior to joining LSE, she was also HR Director at University of Cambridge and has wealth of experience in human resources and other professions. Again, she can share Indy can share his experiences. And last but not the least, we have Professor Almudena Sevilla. Forget my, please.
Very good. I will.
This morning, I was at a long session on Ukraine recovery reconstruction, where I was sharing many sessions. Unfortunately, I had the distinction of getting almost every name wrong.
So I can't get through that
So
way.
my apologies.
No? Oh, no, it's this way.
Chair of the Royal Economic Society UK Women in Economics Network, also Professor of Economic and Social Policy at the Department of Social Policy at LSE, many other distinguished. So today we'll hear from each of the
So I recently started working as the chair of the Women in Economics Committee at the EA. So I wanted to, use this time to give you a brief summary of what the committee has been doing since its foundation in 2005. And, and then a few thoughts on, the topic of today's meeting on this, how can we design academic careers to be more inclusive. So first about the committee. So the goal of this committee is to help women economists in Europe advance in their careers. There's been basically three ways in which the committee has been doing that. First, and I think very successful task by the committee is to organize a yearly mentoring retreat. So this takes place a couple of days before the EA Congress, and it has been run for many years with great feedback. So I'll talk a bit more about that. A second, so one of the jobs, then it's related to mentoring. A second mission of the committee is to gather and disseminate information on gender gaps and career challenges for women in economics. And here there's basically two things that have been done. One is a data collection effort that I'll also discuss in more detail about these, the leaking pipeline in academia within Europe, where, data was scarcer than in the US. And a second important role of the committee is to disseminate research on gender. Here, there is always one session organized in the EA Congress. And then there is also a lot of resources on the website and some collaborations, with other institutions to organize, different seminars and activities related to gender. So those are the main actions by the committee. And then there's also some actions by the EA that have been supported by the committee that I'll mention later. So let me mention a little bit in more detail why I think the actions by the committee have been important. The mentoring retreat has, I think, we haven't conducted a randomized evaluation of it, but there is feedback from both mentees and mentors. And both value a lot, the retreat. One part of it is related to how-to sessions where mentors give advice on how to publish, how to build a tenure case, how to network in the profession, how to balance teaching and administrative tasks with research. And this, in a sense, there's many things that are different for women than men in those paths. So it's useful to have a discussion that is targeted specifically for women. One of the main concerns that mentees express is what's the right time to have children during the academic career. Many women worry that in the way the career is structured right now, there is no right time because during the PhD, people don't have the economic resources to have children. And after the PhD, there is this very short time window to attain tenure. And after tenure, fertility falls very, to very low levels. So it's very risky to postpone having children. So in a way, this is one of the concerns and one of the things that is discussed in the retreat is different strategies that women have had to overcome that more or less successfully. Another issue is the low representation of women and how these sometimes implies that women don't have a lot of opportunities for sharing their concerns. Some examples are different things that I think came up in the AA climate survey, like the fact that women felt that they were not, taken seriously in the profession sometimes, or they were interrupted more in seminars, or they felt excluded socially, etc. And I think the retreat is a forum where people can discuss these issues and different ways in which you can overcome them and not feel that it's your fault that you are not getting attention or that you are being interrupted in a seminar, but it's something about the profession that affects more people. So I think that that's extremely useful. A second important endeavor is to disseminate this research about gender. Here, I would say that this is also something that is important in terms of having an effect in the real world. I have two examples that I think, the paper by Antecol et al., for example, showing that symmetric tenure clock extensions end up hurting women. I found that research very useful in my own career. I did tenure track in two different institutions. In the first institution where I did it, there was no clock extension. And I, bargained to get a rule that there was an asymmetric clock extension for women. And many of my male colleagues were upset about the fact that it was asymmetric. And I didn't have any argument to defend that policy. In the second institution where I did the tenure track, it was also the first woman in the institution, like in the first one. And I also requested this asymmetric policy. At the time, some male colleagues also got upset in the faculty meeting about that, but then I could bring up this paper to say, look, there is evidence that symmetric clock extensions hurt women. So I think research in gender is very useful because we don't know what causes the leaky pipeline and the situation that we're facing in economics and in science in general. And this research helps us think about how to solve these problems. So one of the missions of the EA is just to make this research well known in the profession, both by male and females. One of the main actions is to conduct or organize a session in the EA Congress. Last year, it was a big success. It was like super well attended, but it was only women in the audience. So this year, we're trying to think about how to change the title so that it's obvious that men should come and listen. We want men in senior positions to know what are the career challenges that women face, from hard research. So I guess those are two very important missions. In terms of the EA, so this is mostly what the committee is doing. In terms of the EEA, I think one of the important policies that was implemented recently and with the participation of former members of the Winnie Committee, was the enactment of a code of conduct. I think that's very important. There was no code of conduct, until very recently, a few years ago. And that code of conduct states explicitly that members of the EA should strive for an inclusive environment, and that should not discriminate or harass their fellow colleagues, especially in cases where they have supervisory power. They should not coerce other people in the profession for their personal advantage. So I think it's very important to have this code of conduct. And one of the issues in Europe that is different from the US is that because of the different legal systems, it's harder to think about ways to enforce and think about enforcement of this code of conduct. So that's one of the pending issues that is not that easy to solve. So I guess that's most of what I wanted to say about the EA. I don't know if I spent all my time or I have one more minute.
Yeah.
Okay, one more minute. Okay, so.
Yes.
Okay, so let me, so I think that's mostly about that. So what can the EA do, a bit more, I think, is to push for good practices. I think we don't do that enough. For example, one great example, I think, is the MIT seminar guidelines. That's a good practice that, came after the AA climate survey, and that I mean, at least my personal experience in the institutions I've worked, I've been pushing for those to be implemented. And frankly, job market seminars are much better since these guidelines have been taken. And it's much easier for me to intervene when I see that somebody is being overly interrupted because of, being young or being female. It's easy because we have these rules, so you can always remind people of the rules that have been approved. So I think pushing for practices that address these type of biases is important, and probably the EA should do a bit more of that in the future. And on that sense, one of the practices that I think or that could be informed by the work we've been seeing today is this idea that I think there is a problem in the way careers are designed, in the sense that during the PhD you're poor, and after the PhD you're on tenure track, and after tenure track you're not fertile anymore. So this is kind of a trap for having a family. And there is research, especially by in sociology in the US, showing how women who women who have children in the 5 years after getting the PhD get tenure. The probability of them having tenure is around 45%. But for men who have children in the 5 years after getting the PhD, the probability of them to have tenure is 78%. So evidently there is a big gap. And then women who survive in academia are much more likely to be childless than men who survive in academia. So I think there is a clear asymmetry in, at least in the data for the 80s, on this, personal penalty to be paid when you follow an academic career. And I think, the evidence we've seen for China on this extension of grant, of the time for applying to grants, is very telling about the type of policies that we should think of when trying to include women in academia. I mean, women might need to take a break, but be able to come back to work, or might need to get part-time jobs. And then the more there is equality in tasks of raising children between men and women, I think the more these type of policies should be applied, of course, for everybody. Having a more flexible academic career where people can have a part-time tenure clock, have extensions, have, leave, or stop working at all and be able to come back, I think is the type of path that is going to allow people to have families and a successful academic career at the same time.
Thank you, Paula. Before I bring Anusha, so let me share a reflection from my day job at the Foreign Office. So 50 years ago, there were hardly any women who were ambassadors for very similar reasons, or people who look like me. And today, about 50% of the ambassadors that we have around the world are women. A lot more from ethnic minorities. It's still not perfect. Still similar challenges, similar like career, family, exactly the same kind of challenges still happen there. But something did change as a result of public policy, and we need to do the same in the economics profession. And Anusha, why don't you share your experience
Sure.
of the challenges and the progress?
Yeah, sure. I'm glad you brought that up, because first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm the chair of the American Economic Association's Committee on the Status of Women in the Economics Profession. And the committee's mandate is to promote and advance the status of women, monitor their progress as they navigate their careers in economics. So I'm glad you brought up a bit of history. So I thought it would be helpful to, some of you may know this, but in 1971, in December, the American Economic Association passed a resolution that declared that economics is not just a man's field. So that's actually a resolution of the AEA. And CSWEP was formed after that, and so has been in existence since 1972. And Carolyn Shaw Bell for whom our mentorship award is named after, was a pioneer. And she sort of did the first departmental survey across the US in 1972. And just to give you some statistics, at that point in time, 7.4% of women, there were 74.4% of economists were women in terms of faculty ranks, and 8% of women were getting, 8% of PhDs were going to women, and of full professors, 2.4% were women. So that's where we sort of started out about 50 years ago, and CSWEP recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. And so if we take sort of the temperature now, we look at what has happened now, that number, after stagnating for a long time, has settled around 30% of faculty are women. The numbers for assistant professors are starting to look much better. It's about 33, 34%. But then we still have the leaky pipeline. So the number of women who actually get tenure, that number jumps down to 27%. So of all tenured associate professors, 27% are women. And then, you know, I was mentioning to some people get stuck in assistant professor purgatory. And the number for full professors has gone up from 2.4%, but is at 18%. So this is still, you know, the numbers have improved considerably in the last 50 years, but still are pretty dismal, especially in the top ranks of the profession. So CSWEP has really been tasked with trying to improve these numbers. And a lot of our efforts were focused on early career mentorship workshops, like our Cement workshop, which was actually run as a randomized controlled trial, where we, given that we're economists who are persuaded by data, we're persuaded by the evidence, we've always taken that data-driven approach to persuading the profession that there may be a need for further interventions and to address the underrepresentation that exists in our profession. And so the Cement workshop really, it was run as a randomized controlled trial. And what you see is it really did improve the numbers in terms of the number of women that were staying in academia, that were getting tenure, but even more sort of had expanded networks of co-authors, had more publications, and all of these metrics that we look at to judge the success and progress of women, you know, it was showing that this intervention of this intense 2.5-day mentorship workshop was indeed paying off. But after a period of progress, we sort of see this, you know, that progress became stalled. And so then the question became, well, what is preventing continued progress? And that's when the climate survey came out in 2018, on the heels of the Me Too movement, and the problems of climate really became apparent in economics. And so you mentioned the climate survey. So you know, one of the questions that was asked was, I'm satisfied with the overall climate within the field of economics, and 40% of men versus 20% of women were likely to say they agreed with that statement. And significant gender disparities persist, and women tend to feel less valued, much less likely to be socially included, and much more likely to have faced discrimination. So this issue of climate became really sort of front and center, and economics has, the CSWEP has really been focused on addressing those issues of climate and how to do interventions to improve the climate for women in the profession. And I just want to state, before I talk about two interventions, I'm happy to, you know, delve more into them as time goes on, but I really think that the lack of representation and diversity, so we're talking about gender in this conference, but as you mentioned, you know, it's minoritized groups as well. All of these things can be extended to minoritized groups. The lack of diversity has far-reaching consequences when it is in the field of academia, because we're talking about the marketplace for ideas and the frontier of knowledge. So when you don't have diverse voices who are advancing that frontier of knowledge, I think it really has profound implications for the field of economics itself and for policymaking at those tables, right? So advancing this has proven more challenging than we had expected in economics in particular. Like other STEM fields, you continue to have a lack of role models, but the climate, because of underrepresentation, is also impacted by the fact that economics itself, our models are based on rational decision-making, where you have rational agents, and the outcomes that we see are the result of the market operating efficiently. So we have to sort of we have to convince people that there is some market failure or some distortion that needs to be addressed. And people have referred to this as the bias against bias in economics, right? So this is sort of what we are encountering now. And given that we're at a stage where the profession as a whole, the AEA, has taken a number of measures to address these climate issues, but including the climate survey, and the second one has just come out. So the question becomes what to do about it. And CSWAP has really been engaged in 2 initiatives, and we've been very fortunate to get some generous funding from both the Sloan Foundation as well as a philanthropic organization called Co-Impact to do these interventions. So the 2 interventions, I don't have a lot of time right now, but these interventions are designed to increase the frequency, duration, and quality of interactions with women as peers, role models, advisors, and mentors. And we've taken a 2-pronged approach. The first is research, so actual interventions such as in Econ 101 classrooms at the high school level. Once people have got tenure, we've sort of, in partnership with the Social Sciences Research Council, we are funding studies. So I was delighted today to see these studies based on data that exists. And now we're trying to create more data by doing these interventions and RCTs in the classroom, et cetera, to attract, retain, and advance the women in the profession. And the second is a set of interventions that I'm happy to talk about more, which is going to take sort of a top-down and bottom-up approach with this funding that we got from Co-Impact to have a chairs conference to equip department chairs with tools to make their departments more inclusive, sexual harassment training, as well as a women in leadership workshop to groom women to rise to leadership ranks where their voice will carry weight when decisions about being inclusive and diverse come up, as well as a bottom-up approach, which is graduate students who are the future of our profession to institute more sustained systemic change that persists, is norm resetting and expectations setting in terms of acculturating the younger generation about what is inclusive, what is not inclusive, and how to create a more diverse profession. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's next go to Laura.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so hi, my name is Laura Parrish. I'm Associate Director at GC Insight, which is an economic development consultancy. But until about a year ago, I worked in the civil service, where I had a lot of involvement with diversity and inclusion. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So just a bit about the Government Economic Service, the GES. So it is the largest professional body for economists is the professional body for economists in the civil service, and it's the largest recruiter of economists in the UK with over 3,500 members. And in terms of female representation in the GES, it's about consistent with the graduate cohort, actually, so not doing too bad. So from 2020 data shows that women make up about 35% of the workforce, but then that sort of leak happens again, where you see that go down to 27% to the senior civil service ranks. So where my experience is slightly different from my other panelists is that I would describe my experience as more grassroots action. So in 2017, I co-founded the Women in Economics Network, which got a lot of women in economics networks, haven't we? Can't really call them much else. And that network was aimed at supporting female economists at the start of their careers to really establish themselves in a career. So just to provide a bit more background about some of the central initiatives that were going on in the GES at the time. So when I started in the civil service in 2015, a lot of the focus from the GES's centrally run initiatives were on what I think as the bookends. So aiming at getting more women in at the start through graduate intake, and then focusing on getting women into the senior civil service positions, and doing some excellent work in doing that. And then in 2018, they set up the Gender in the GES initiative with an aim to promote gender diversity within the GES, as well as in the economics profession more broadly, aiming to improve these overall stats on female representation. And so they've done similar work to what some of the panelists have mentioned around sort of code of conduct for events, great outreach work with schools and universities, rules around female representation on interview panels. But what my network aimed to do was to fill what I saw as this missing middle, which is where helping women to get established in their careers a bit quicker than the other ways might do, helping them to build their confidence and achieve their potential. And the civil service is really excellent in that it really encourages these networks. Anyone can set up a network about any issue that they want to see. So off I did. Because I think when I first started my career, I think I really needed some more support with the issues that I felt were holding me back in terms of my potential. And it was around things like imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, which I know a lot of women struggle with. And in my graduate cohort in my government department, I was the only female economist. And so when I spoke to my male colleagues about it, they didn't really understand. You know, I said, oh, I can't really seem to speak up in a meeting, or when I do, I'm worried that people are judging my accent, or, I'm not taken as seriously as other people. And so when I first got the opportunity to meet other female economists from other departments, I found real solace in the fact that I could talk to them about these issues and they could share their tips with me, and just moan as well. It's sometimes really useful to just moan about these things. And as I met more and more women, I realized that a lot of women were in the same position as me, and we were really benefiting from sharing that experience with each other. And so I, along with a very good economist friend of mine called Chloe Maycock, decided to create a network to formalize these sort of informal relationships that we had sort of fostered. And it kind of snowballed from there. So when I left the network last year, it had over 350 members across more than 25 departments and agencies. And bear in mind, we had no funding whatsoever. So the network, we did a lot of consultation to understand what people wanted to see. We had a good idea of what we wanted to see, but we wanted to get a good view of what other people were after. And we ended up running loads of different events and offers. So we ran social events, we ran panel events where we would invite senior women to come along to discuss issues that you probably wouldn't normally hear them speak about. So some of my favorites were, is it ever okay to cry at work? Because I certainly cry at work a lot, and it's really nice hearing other people talk about the fact that they've cried at work, but are still incredible at what they do, and that it doesn't matter. Or, does it really matter what you wear at work? We know it shouldn't. Does it? There was a really interesting debate on that one from the panelists. Also sort of training sessions on things like confidence in public speaking and promotion tips, peer mentoring groups, book clubs, anything really that people want to see, we put it on. And so there's a real focus today on sort of positive outcomes and evidence, but I'm sorry that I've not got that much concrete evidence of the impact from the network because of its nature. Our objectives were around building confidence, helping women to achieve their potential, promote positive culture change, and these kinds of things are quite difficult to measure. But we did do surveys and we did reach out to try and get feedback from members and adapt our offer over time. And we did get self-reported feedback that people really enjoyed the network and the events. It helped them to build up contacts that they wouldn't otherwise have made across the civil service, that they then used to find out about job opportunities elsewhere. The sessions really inspired them, helped them to build skills and their confidence levels, with the panel events being a particular hit. And to be honest, one of the best pieces of feedback that I got was that someone said, yours is the only newsletter that I don't automatically send to my junk box on a Friday, which I think is a real, I'm really proud of. So I don't think I'm ever really going to understand the full impact of the network. I'm incredibly proud of it. I've passed the reins on now. I held on a bit too long, but it's someone else's now. But one of our hopes in setting up the network was to provide people with the opportunity to build really strong networks early on in their career, that they're able to rely on as they go throughout their career. So yes, that means sort of formal connections. So someone might pass on a job and think, I think you'd be great for this job, or put them forward for a job, but also the kind of informal networks that are really important. You know, someone to call up the night before a job interview and say, oh my God, I've got no idea what I'm doing. Please, can you listen to my answer and talk it through with me? Or to give you a bit of a pep talk before you've got a big presentation or something. I think they're really important as well, particularly for women in addressing some of the imposter syndrome that can sometimes get. And I know that I personally benefited from the connections I made through the network when I decided to leave the civil service, where I had access to a range of people to speak to about different opportunities out there, to decide where to go. So I suppose the key message I want to put across today is that women don't need to wait for these top-down career structures to be in place in order to take meaningful action. Women, including junior women, can implement action themselves to ensure that they are in the best place to take advantage of opportunities that may be created for them. You know, what good is it making it mandatory to have a female panelist on an interview to reduce bias if women aren't confident enough to go for the jobs in the first place? And I think there's a real role for these kind of more informal structures and initiatives to work alongside the more formal structures put in place. And the network did achieve great things without any real funding. But so, you know, the barriers to entry were quite small, but I should flag that, you know, the civil service is a very supportive environment, and there's an excellent culture of encouraging everyone to get involved with corporate activity. So, you know, it did take up a lot of my time, but I was allowed to use some of my time on the day job to do that as well, which I know not everyone would have. So, you know, now I've left the civil service and passed on the reins of the network, I am really missing that structure. And of the GES more generally as an organisation, but the Women in Economics in particular. I can only comment on the gender balance of my company, but my company has excellent gender balance and an excellent culture stemming from that. So our senior leadership team is all women and one gay man. So we're doing quite well. It's probably not balanced, actually, if you think about it. So I've not actually felt a real need for this kind of support yet in the scary world of the private sector. But I've heard from colleagues who've spent their careers in economic consulting elsewhere that this isn't the norm. So I've got itchy fingers. I'm sort of trying to think about what kind of network I can set up next. So yeah, I just, I'm trying to understand what else is out there at the moment. I think that's my time.
Thank you, Laura. So what you're saying resonates quite a lot with my experience as economics and civil services. Although in my case, I've never let bad exams stand in the way. So what we discovered was there were far less economists like coming from either women or from minority background. And much of the failure happened at the school level, not enough for going to the profession. So we had a competition called Next Generation Economics Competition. So like encouraging people in school, going to each school, not every school, but going to a lot of schools, encouraging them to become economists, apply for government services, also for this competition, which is an essay competition. And now we're collaborating with Stakert in running their competition. So we also learn from evidence. Earlier, the prize was that they spend a day meeting the chief economist, which is me, but we learned that acted more like a punishment. So now they spend half a day at Stakert and half a day at Foreign Office. 600 people applied last year. There's an active campaign going on this year. Please do support it. So with that, let me pass over to Armita.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today. Not so far from my office as well, so that's good. Thank you, Ariana and Imran, for having me. And to all of you, it's great to have such a big audience, because what I'm going to talk about is the experience as chair of the UK Women's Network. And one of the things that has been really amazing over the year that we've been operating is the kind of support from from the bottom up support that we've received, and as well, of course, as all the institutional support that we've had to set up the network. So what is UK-WEN? Because there was some WEN before me. So UK-WEN was founded last year as part of the Royal Economic Society's initiative, as part of the Women's Economic Committee in the Royal Economic Society, to bring together women economists across the sectors. So women economists in the government economic service, women economists in the financial sector, women economists in the technical or tech companies like Google and Amazon. There's a lot of economists working there, and of course, academia. So the idea was very much a bottom-up approach to bring women together to support one another, to create change in the discipline. So the network is structured into 4 different streams or initiatives so that we can be sure that we meet our goals. So the first one is our network, and that's the network initiative. So we have an annual event that has happened already twice, because we just had it in February, our second annual event. So the first event was at the Bank of England, and our second annual event happened in Nomura. We did a hybrid event, and we had about 350 participants. So the room was full, 200, and then a bunch of other people online. So really the interest for these kind of networks, it's really a good thing to see that there's so much interest, but also it kind of made me think that, well, we're still a long way to go, because it seems that women economists do want to talk to one another and to see what's going on. So that's the network initiative. We have a support initiative as well that Chloe is leading on. So we have career events, where we have a series of women talking about their experiences, and this is about learning what other what paths are out there for junior and mid-career women, and also coaching sessions of the sort of what you were talking about imposter syndrome, etc., things that are more general. And we also have a women economists presenting their research or policy research. So our last year, we had a big event at JP Morgan Asset Management, again, widely oversubscribed, and we had the CEO endorsing the event, a man economist. So it's great to have that kind of support from higher up in all these companies and institutions. 5. Okay. What other things we do? So we do inspirational talks as well across universities. So again, we want women that graduate from economics, and we know that there is a lack of women entering in the first place, but also those women actually do not go on to work as an economist, and that affects policy because of lack of diversity, and economists play a big role in policy making. So we go to universities. We also go to the government. We went to the OCR the other day, and it's about inspiring women and telling them how wonderful an economics career can be if you have the right support in place. So those are very much bottom-up approaches. And the last sort of initiative is this action initiative. So it's something that you were mentioning as well, is empowering women to actually bring about change. Part of that initiative, we have the peer learning sets where we train. It just happened yesterday, actually, our first pilot. So we're piloting that initiative. But the idea here is to train women or to coach women as to how to go about bringing that change into their institutions or their departments around, around code of conduct, for example. How do we go about navigating those structures? So that's the network. But of course, it is within the broader Royal Economic Society in a strategy, and the support from the Royal Economic Society has been fundamental for the success of the network, as well as the Bank of England, who've signaled that diversity in economics is important. So for us, that's been crucial to have that initial support. And now we're getting more people interested in funding some of our activities. For the first year, it's been a very time-consuming but very rewarding sort of experience. So I have not a lot of time. I would say in terms of impact, I think the numbers and the caliber of the speakers that we've had at our events and endorsing what we were doing speak for themselves. For me, I think it's also being stopped at a conference by somebody that I don't know, and they're so grateful for what we're doing. And that's happened more than once. And to me that's what, but it would be nice to measure it and to have some RCTs as well. So I leave it there.
Thank you, Armadina. Finally, what is the HR perspective? How do you correct for these biases?
Thank you. So yeah, I hold the popular post of Director of HR at LSE. And amongst other things, there are other things I do as well, and they'll come up in my brief talk. But I was just sort of sitting here admiring the photos on my right-hand side of the Vice Chancellors. And it just happens to be the case. There are two women Vice Chancellors photos there. Both of them took on the job for an interim basis to help LSE out. The other four men enjoyed the job for a reasonable period of time. So like many of us, our history isn't always the thing to look at, but there will be another photo that will go on, which allows me to improve the story. But Manoush Shafiq's photo portrait will soon be ready, who actually was our first appointment at the Vice Chancellor President level, who wasn't just helping us out. Yeah. But look, two or three examples really of how practitioners are using the very valuable policy work and research work that is going on. I thought I could sort of at least come along and just talk a little bit about that. If nothing, to give you all hope that we are listening, but also, just talk about some of the practicalities of sometimes how one converts research policy and knowledge gain into the reality of our everyday work. Certainly with Oriana and the Hub, there is one or two very important examples that I think I would point out. So in 2016-17, we carried out a pay equity exercise of all our academics. And as we're London School of Economics, that's not far away of saying we're carrying out a pay equity exercise of our economists. It had a bit of media at the time. There are only 4 or 5 universities that I recollect ever doing the sort of exercise we did, which was to actually acknowledge that we probably didn't have pay right. For historical reasons, there'll be a number of things that means biases have crept in. And what we were going to do was to have a one-off go at trying to equalize pay. And I deliberately use that terminology. But why did we get there? We got there because we had the idea that we should look at this subject. And then somebody else had the bright idea of saying, let's do it independently rather than HR doing it, which usually means, we do the research and it gives us a nice set of implementations that we already know we can do. We actually sort of almost internally outsourced it and asked the Hub and Oriana's team, would they independently look at this? So the implication of that was we suddenly had a report in front of us, and now all of us had to take action on it. Now, if any of you have ever had the chance to say, how do we address this and address it quickly, what you'll find is there's 100 reasons why you shouldn't do it quickly right now. You know, all the lawyers have very good reasons and all the rest. And, you know, how do you defend yourself from not going back 10 years and all the rest? And there's usually one reason why you should do it. And hopefully the one reason is very obvious. But we decided we'll do it despite all of that. And we decided we'd do it because firstly, there's an independent report. Secondly, the independent report is semi-independent because it's been done by an academia, you know, hub within our own university. And thirdly, we just know it's obviously wrong. So we've got to get it right, and we've got to do this quite quickly. So there was quite a major investment into that process, which actually result, you know, the remarkable thing is that when you go to a set of academics and you say, we've got a problem, this is the problem, and we now need to sort it. We've got lots of problems in sorting it, but we want to do it this way. And although it won't be completely fair, and although there'll be many issues, will you come along with us because we're doing the right thing? And the answer to that is yes, everybody did. Yeah, and despite all the concerns, but you know, you're vulnerable in this and vulnerable in that, not a single complaint. About 20% of the salaries that changed were men, which was sort of a surprise to us, but useful. And 80% of the salaries that changes one would expect are women. And that occurred at every single level of the career track. So we managed to get it wrong at recruitment, we managed to get it wrong at mid-career, and we managed to get it wrong at professorship. But we corrected it. We corrected it and acknowledged, because this is what we learned from Oriana's team, is that despite as much as we try, it will start to reverse again because there are a whole series of unconscious bias that take a lot longer to go through. And indeed, since then, we've approached on very small things, Oriana's team. And indeed, this year, we're going to try and do a further mini shared equity exercise to see where we vary by more than 5%, we question that and look at how we might address it. A second example that I would give is that there's a lot of noise at different times in LSE about whether we should have a published ethnicity pay gap. And for various reasons, we thought we'll go with the government policy, and of course the government policy in the end fizzled into nothing. So we're subject to some criticism, but we approached Oriana's team just to say, look, would you help with analysis of, do we have a problem? Because we must do, and where is it? Is it all the way across, or is it? And it was a very interesting analysis because actually what it did was it pointed out to us two significant grades where like for like, we could not actually defend the actual pay of individuals and what they were on. Now, at the moment, we can't analyze and say we can explain why that is. But in a way, what we could do was address it straight away and have a strategy, which is what we've been doing. And it's sort of a 3-year strategy, and we're into year 2 addressing a particular issue in what in our environment is called Band 4 and Band 6. Having said that, I thought also I would use a very different example because some things in this space are going to take decades. So, hey, I've got one joint publication. Unbeknownst to me, I was doing a bit of work with academics because we had won some money to look at what were the issues surrounding social security and pensions, which were resulting in early career researchers not having the same experiences in relation to gender. And this was back in 2010. We published a report which actually, you know, did get publication, and effectively the outcome of it is this, which is if you're mobile as a researcher, and you have to be mobile to get to the very best careers, women are more likely to have shorter periods of mobility and therefore less likely to ever get, for those of you who understand pensions, a vesting period. And put it in a nutshell, by the time you even get to academia, the bias has already crept in. As a woman, you're unlikely to have a pension, less likely than as a man, yeah, because you wouldn't have crossed the vesting periods. To address that, we said to the EU that actually, you know, there's a number of solutions which will take a long time, but one of the solutions has to be that you as an EU need to actually have a pension scheme. You need to create one and have one out there for early career researchers. And it's going to take 30 to 40 years before you have enough organizations to wipe away that. Now, the significance of that is that the policy work done by academics and the data collected at the time, and there's a 2010 report that collects that data, and I was involved in the data collection, resulted in the EU in 2016, after 6 years of hard work, launching a pension scheme. It's called ReSaver, and it's existed for 7 years. And I happen to be chair of the consortium, but it's only because it's my turn round. But the important thing is I'm one of the directors of the scheme. And what it's trying to do is, over a period of time, get a vast number of research institutions, not universities so much, research institutions and other types of bodies across Europe to join one single pension scheme. So this is an example which spreads about 3 or 4 decades, where it says, we won't get this right, this will take a long time, but if we stick with it, we will. And we're on our 7th year of getting a grant from the EU in terms of how the pension scheme is run. We don't make our own profit yet because we are charging minimal charges because the EU funds us so that we have the best possible chance of spreading this across the board in order to address the equalization issue of the experience of early career researchers across the EU and encourage mobility and therefore, you know, an impact on knowledge creation. The final thing I will say, just to look out for, is I also happen to be an advisor on the Global Employment Mobility Board of the International Bar Association. And we've just won some money, and I'm quite excited about this project, on the impact of migration on equalization in terms of gender. So in other words, if you had no borders and everybody could go wherever they wanted to, yeah, men would do far better than women. Yeah, men are able to go and be mobile far more than women, which doesn't surprise us. Yeah. Having said that, if you had everybody close down their country, knowledge creation would be hugely impacted. So neither of those two are right. But this is a study to look at how do governments need to move if we are to create an element of equalization in relation to what are the barriers that result in, as soon as borders are open, yeah, the number of women that are able to be mobile in any way are far less than men. And therefore, how do you address that issue? Yeah, which I think is fantastic. And, you know, this is going to be work we're going to do over the next 3 to 5 years, but is another example of how, at the moment, we look at how we collect data on that. Because we collected some pre-data, which allowed us to then ask for funding. But now it's how we convert that into something that's of value and ultimately helps the International Bar Association to influence government policies certainly in relevant Western societies. I'll stop there. Thank you.